So
well, let's recap who she is too. She's not the greatest of ladies.
She's a bad mama jamma.
Is Mama Jamma a bad word? We're like, no, that's a great word. Use
Making
it.
sure. That's the only reason they brought me on. So.
Say it again. Drop it again.
A mama jamma.
Bad Mama Jamma. Just throwing that out there.
she's a bad mama jamma.
This one's dedicated to Jezebel.
Welcome to Bonus Features, a podcast where we dive into the crazy, unexpected, and interesting details that we didn't have time to talk about on Sunday. When you get into God's Word gets into you. We want to help you get into the Bible, understand the Bible, and apply the Bible. And our hope is that Bonus Features will help you do that. Well, guys, I am Caroline. I'm joined today by Pastor Kevin.
Thank you. That's a great intro. Almost sounds like you're reading that.
Oh my gosh,
It
does
sounds
it?
like scripted. That's just off
Really?
the cuff, though.
Wow,
It's so exciting.
It's effortless, you know? I appreciate that. Pastor Jason?
Hello.
Yeah.
How's everyone?
What a much kinder intro than Pastor Kevin's.
Hello.
And Pastor Matt.
Yeah, it feels good to be back, you know.
Back
I've
from
been
season
since
one?
Yeah, first season, first episode, and you brought me back.
Season finale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm ready.
You made it.
Yeah. The season premiere, season finale, like the bookend guy. All right. Well, actually, I don't know what
That's
that means.
your new nickname.
Yeah, bookend.
The bookend
Yeah,
guy.
I love it.
There's worse
That's pretty
nicknames.
serious.
So we're feeling good about
Yeah.
stuff today, aren't we?
Well, bonus features, this is the end of season 2. And I feel like, usually you get into season 1 and you're like, we'll see how this goes. Season 2, it's like the people have spoken.
I agree.
People.
No sophomore slump on season 2, right? You ever heard that term? Mm-mm. What? I've heard
Sophomore
that term, right?
slump? Do you
never
know?
heard that?
I know the freshman 15. but it's fine. It's fine.
Yes, that I'm familiar
Okay,
with.
we skipped that one.
So you've never heard that, really? Like
sophomore
the second album that an artist puts out is not as good as the first.
Yeah.
They call it a sophomore slump.
Nope.
Am I the only
I
person
disagree.
who's
Have you heard
cultured
Adele's
around
second
here?
album?
Because they
Because
have to
it
like
slaps.
jump on and capitalize the success. And so they have to put something out fast, and it's typically not as good as the first, which most sequels aren't. So then they have
See?
to go beyond sequel.
See? He
Have you
knows.
seen Free Willy too?
There's a Free Willy too.
Second's always the best.
No, well, that's not true. Okay, well, bonus features is part of Bench the Bible series that we've been doing for the last couple of months at Lifepoint Church. And I thought we started the series, but also the podcast, really just to dive in a little bit more. And the heartbeat behind starting this series was really just to help people get into the Word and experience it in a new way, and teach them, maybe some new things and that maybe we haven't gotten a chance to do in the past. So what are you guys saying, like, as being part of the last couple of months of Bench the Bible, what are some things that y'all have really enjoyed and seen happen?
Well, personally, because I know I'm on here as the resident nerd, so I guess I'm supposed to know a lot about all this. The fact is, there's just constant study. In my personal life, so I have like professional study, but then I have personal study. And even thinking about it on the way here today, all the people that have been talking about how they've been reading the Bible for the first time, like it's almost kind of come to life because we're reading it as a one big story and not just a passage from like a Sunday or a Bible study, which those are awesome and they're definitely needed. But when you step back and really read the Bible as part of the big story and that God's involved in it all, and it starts to connect, it starts to make sense. And so for my personal study, even listening to other people visiting some of our campuses like Porter's Neck and Leland, being at Pine Valley and talking to some of our Carolina Beach people, the connections that I'm making is I'm really seeing how everything connects. Like right now, we just finished up 2 Kings, but I'm seeing how 2 Kings connects to Exodus and Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
But I'm also seeing how that stuff connects to the time of Jesus and even now in our world at large. And so it's crazy how you start to see it connect, but then you start to trust. And my faith has been encouraged just because I see how relevant it is even now, even more so.
Yeah.
I think what's great about it is Pastor Jeff's teaching us how to feed ourselves. We're getting a taste every week. He's not spelling everything out for us, but it's teaching us now how to go home and feed ourselves throughout the week. And so I think that's been great for our church. Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I feel like I've heard more stories of people who are just getting into the Bible on their own.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's a new thing. Or they've done that for years. I was talking to someone at Porter's Neck a couple of weeks ago at that campus, and they said, I've read the Bible for years, but it's just come alive in a new way. And so I think that to me is encouraging, that people they're taking the messages and the craziness that we have in here, and they're actually like, it's helping them just engage in God's Word in a new way. So to me, that's exciting.
Yeah, and it's like even framing, obviously the Bible we've had access to it in the same way forever, but even just reframing it in a way that's like seasons, it's like, I don't want to rock anybody's world, but we made that up. Like there's not actually seasons in my Bible, you know what I mean? Sorry to ruin anybody's idea if they thought that was part of it, but just even reframing it of like episodes and seasons and stuff like that. I feel like that's just such a cultural thing right now that it's so much easier to grasp on for people, like it's easier to jump into for people that I've talked to and myself too. Well, Pastor Jason said, we're finishing up 2 Kings. We're really talking about the bulk of 2 Kings today. We talked about a little bit about it last week, but so 2 Kings, let's talk about, kind of where we came out of 1 Kings into 2 Kings, what the purpose of 2 Kings is. Pastor Kevin brought a great word on 2 Kings this week and taught us all about the story of where it fits in.
Yeah, and props to Pastor Kevin. There was so much information.
Yeah, there's a lot.
From the time of the transition of Elijah and Elisha through the demise of the northern kingdom.
There's a lot of narratives that don't fit together because you're bouncing back and forth between the two kingdoms, and then there's just a lot there. And Pastor Jeff's done the same thing with every message, that you're trying to find like those pieces that fit the narrative but also fit life and just kind of where people are at. So it's a fun adventure, but it's a challenge, definitely. Yeah. It's good.
Well, it's fun. Well, and it's cool too because you're seeing 2 Kings is kind of the book where we see like kind of the culmination of a bigger overall promise that the nation of Israel would be unified. They would have their land, their kingdom. We've seen a successful kingdom. We've seen a kingdom start to crumble. Then we saw it successful again. And we've just seen God like every time making a way so he could stay involved with his people and making a way so that they could stay close to him. Remember when we learned in Leviticus, it wasn't about like just law, you have to do this to come. And they were instructions on how to approach God and stay close to God, experience the blessings of God. And so the 2 Kings is, we're seeing a nation not do that. 2 Kings predominantly discusses the history of the northern kingdom, which we know is Israel. So we see them mentioned more in detail here. We'll see Judah mentioned more as we get into like season 3 and stuff like that of Binge the Bible, not the actual Bible. There's no season 3, like Caroline said, in the Bible. But the overall theme of 2 Kings is the dispersion of a nation. We see Israel crumbling slowly, falling into sin, not doing right in the eyes of the Lord. Yeah. But where we pick up in 2 Kings, part 2, with Pastor Kevin with you, was we see Elisha taking the role and the mantle of Elijah. And so let's just talk about his character just for a few minutes. You guys feel free to chime in because he's a super cool guy. Yeah. And it's amazing. You see him walking with urgency at every step. From the time that Elijah called him, he left his oxen. In fact, he slaughtered them. He burned the plow so that he couldn't return back to it. He offered the oxen as a sacrifice and offering up to the Lord, and then walked with Elijah. And then when he sees that he's closer at the closer to taking over Elijah's spot, we see him. He gets even closer to Elijah. He's like, "I'm not leaving you." And personally, I love the language here because he takes his role so seriously. And something that is not really discussed in this part of Kings is that at this time there was basically like a guild of prophets. There were other prophets of the Lord. We see that they had been hidden, 1 Kings, from Ahab and Jezebel. There was a guild this guild was probably started by Samuel, that he would have given all the instruction, kind of passed that down. We see it kind of fall in. At the end of this, we see prophets like Isaiah. He would have been kind of the Samuel of his day. And continuing the instruction of the guild of the prophets. I'm just calling it that because lack of a better term. But Elijah is ruling these guys, basically leading them right now. And just remember, there are 3 levels of leadership in the nation of Israel. There's the king, who is kind of he's over the people, and kind of to God at the same time. Priest represents the voice of the people to God. Prophet represents the voice of God to everybody. Mm-hmm. So it's a big deal. And we see him kind of walking through all of this. And the language that I love, in fact, in chapter 2, if you see right where this is where we see Elisha and Elijah transitioning. They were walking along, this is verse 11 in chapter 2, as they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the 2 of them. Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried, "My father, my father." And Pastor Kevin, I feel like you would be really aware of language like this, like growing up in our particular denomination. Yeah. There was a lot of people that considered they had fathers in spirit. They were spiritual fathers. And Elisha felt like Elijah was his spiritual father. And you kind of see this. This is an expression of excitement. It's an expression of a little bit of mourning, expression of joy, but he's also letting him know, you are my spiritual father, and this is the mantle I want. And you even see that in his approach of asking for the double portion of the ministry and of the anointing that Elijah had. And Elijah said, I don't have that to give. And this is a harken back to whenever we see even like Jacob stealing the birthright from Esau. This is the same thing. Elisha is asking for the birthright from Elijah. And he said, this in this particular case is not mine to give, but if you're there when I go, you can have my mantle. And we do see him like literally picking up the mantle.
No, that idea of spiritual fatherhood, like there's a lot of talk in the Bible about accountability, which we all need. And usually that comes from peers, but usually anointing is passed down.
Yeah.
And I mean, even, what is it, Psalm 133, I think it is, it talks about how it flows down an individual. And it's the same thing with a spiritual father, especially in this regard. When you start talking about, and I'm using this term loosely, all right, but like a person of elevated impact, a prophet in those days, a priest, a king. It was someone who was able to like plug in under another person who was able to transfer that anointing down. Because the anointing, as we know, it doesn't flow the same through into any two people. And so that spiritual father, I know for me, the ones I have in my life, it's a lot less oftentimes about like telling me exactly how to do something, and it's more about the perspective of what I'm going through. And to me, I look at Elisha, and one of the reasons I think that, and this is the Kevin International version a little bit, right? But one of the reasons I think he was able to have double the miracles that Elijah did was because he had perspective. And there's a lot of power that comes when someone else is able to look at you and go, yeah, here's probably what you're walking through. Here's probably what you're feeling. And so just having that presence in his life for that amount of time, it really gave him the ability to run faster when it was his time.
And to walk under that authority. And I feel like I'm taking Pastor Jeff's place today because I'm just hearing an old song in my head. Anointing fall on me.
I know that one. Yeah, I'm not going to sing it, but I know it.
The Holy Ghost fall on me.
You want me to go in my falsetto? I can do the soprano version.
Absolutely want you to do that. Yeah.
But I love that you said accountability, because today's age, people don't really want accountability. We don't want to put ourselves up under authority. And I see it as a parent. Pastor Jeff preached on this like years ago. I think we were still at Rolling Rice when he said this. But he said we have the power of the authority and the anointing to speak over our kids. So parents, if you're listening, what you speak over your kids, you have the authority to pray over. Yeah. So be careful what you speak into their life. And Elisha took that authority so seriously that he didn't back away. He was constantly under the authority of Elijah and ready to go. And I think that's the case where we see one of the first miracles that we see with Elijah or Elisha is in chapter 2 towards the end. This is after his first miracle, which was he redid what Elijah did. But you see that he comes out and he went to Bethel. This is verse 23. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and jeered at him, "Get out of here, Baldy." I feel like, has that name really been around for that long? We couldn't think of a better nickname since then.
People call me that because my last name is Baldwin, so I get called that pretty often.
So I can call you Baldy now?
I would rather you not.
I would not. I'm your friend. I want to stay your friend.
He turned around. Like the term jeered. I don't use the word jeered enough. I think I'm going to start using that. Yeah, do that.
Like they were poking the bear.
There you
go. Don't arouse his anger. He turned around and looked at them and called a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears, I like the version that says the 2 she-bears, but this says 2 bears. 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. And then he went on to Mount Carmel, returned to Samaria like nothing happened. So I love it. It's kind of funny. Oh, and by the way, my daughter, she's 10 years old, and she volunteers in kids ministry, and she serves in kids ministry. Yesterday, she served in kids ministry, but also was there for the lesson. So she came out between services. We were there all day, and she said, "Daddy, can I come sit with you and Mom during service?" And I was like, "Well, okay, sweetie, come out." And she usually doesn't ask. She likes to stay in kids, and she'll volunteer for a lot of it. But yesterday, she went out, and Pastor Kevin, when you talk through this particular portion, I looked at her because I don't have any hair, so I wear a hat all the time. I looked at her and she's like, "Daddy, I'm never going to do anything again."
Sorry, Dad.
Thank you,
Daddy.
I thought that story was gonna go that she was like, "Guess what we learned about today in Lifepoint Kids," and I was gonna be like,
"Yeah, not to make fun of bald men."
Bears mauling children.
Right.
That's what we learned about.
I mean,
see the picture I colored? That's weird. That's awkward.
The two bears, every time I read this is so silly. I think about, you remember Yogi Bear?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, boo-boo. Yeah. That's all I think about every time.
Those are the bears that you think.
I'm like, I know. I'm studying for like this weekend, and all I can think about when I read this is, hey, boo-boo.
Dude, I mispronounced picnic for years after watching that cartoon. Picnic.
Picnic.
They didn't know what the heck I was talking. I was already from Columbus County. Nobody knew what I was talking about anyway. I'm like, what is a picnic? What are you saying?
That's great.
I mean, for me growing up, the Bible was always brought to life in experiences with my mom, and we actually went to a zoo. We saw a bear, and my mom's like, it could have been one of those bears that killed those boys. And I was like, excuse me? And she's like, that's why we don't make fun of people. I don't even have no context. And I just grew up. You don't make fun of people because a bear or another animal might get you. So just be careful, kids. I mean, here's your warning.
And this is a tough subject because like people are like, why would he call out? There's a lot of discussion on like, was this of God? Like, why can he do that? And when you look at who Elisha was, like the seriousness of his call, and whenever you're making fun of a prophet, they represented the Lord. So he's basically, you're not making fun of the prophet, you're making fun of the Lord. And so it's got to be vindicated.
And there aren't many prophets in history that were good hangs. That's like, if you're just being really honest, like the prophets don't play. Like all of them, they were just so serious about what they did, which rightfully so. But they were the ones who were, you think about the pressure of a prophet is that they're hearing directly from God. And so when you have that, the reason I think Elisha benefited from Elijah's perspective is because when you hear directly from God, that all you see is everybody else going the opposite direction. The personal pressure that brings of just like a blend of grief, a blend of like pain, anger. Like all of the stuff that brings, because these guys were human too. I mean, they weren't just robots. And most of them too, we don't talk about this a lot, but they were persecuted. I mean, we'll talk about the miracle with the widow and the oil in a few minutes. And when we do, I mean, she was the prophet guild you're talking about, like her husband was a part of that. One of the reasons they were probably in poverty was because most of the time prophets lived on the run because they were chased down, hunted, killed, imprisoned. The employment was something that they couldn't have. Like they just couldn't hold it, because most people didn't want to help them out in any way. They were usually on the outskirts of society. So anyway, you read all that combined and you think, I'd probably call a bear out too. I mean.
And it's such a good one. And the fact that he has so many more miracles, I mean, double the amount of miracles that Elijah. So we do see that he was granted that double portion of all that. And Pastor Kevin, I didn't know if there's anything left from Elisha that you didn't get to talk through yesterday, but I thought it'd be fun to go around and we're going to kind of share our miracle and kind of talk about why that stands out to us. But I don't know if there's anything from yesterday that
I think we've covered it pretty well. I mean, I feel like for him it was from a personality side. What you covered, Pastor Jason, was really good. I think one of the things I was not able to really get to yesterday were the miracles for the most part. I was able to mention them, but part of it is just the time, being able to like get through that. To me, the purpose of Elisha's miracles and the purpose of any prophet was to speak to the nation that, hey, and for them it was to say repent, like turn back, and what you're doing, where you're going is not where you need to be going, what you need to be doing. And so to me, that overarching kind of flow, that was what Elisha was there to be. And the miracles were an outflow of that. So I think we jump into miracles. I don't mind jumping into, for me, the one that I love that I did cut out of the message that was originally was going to make the cut, but just for time's sake couldn't make it, was the widow and oil. And it's in 2 Kings chapter 4. A lot of things I love about that. We've kind of already mentioned it. This woman, her husband was a prophet. He's gone. They say, history says it was probably the prophet Obadiah was her husband. And essentially what happened, and we'll just read it in verse 1. The wife of a man, this is chapter 4, verse 1. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets, or the guild of prophets, as Pastor Jason said, cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take me and my boys as slaves." And so Elisha replied to her, and this is really, for me, this is what speaks to me from this miracle, is what Elisha doesn't do is shame her, but what he does is he says, well, how can I help? And I think so many times for me, and this is going off a little bit, when people need help, the first thing that I often do is tell them my opinion on what they need. And what Elisha just does is he stops and says, how can I help? Like, what do you need? And I think about that just in a practical way. And this is a little bit of a rabbit, chase. But when we're walking through issues with people, sometimes the last thing they need on their issues is our opinion about their issues. Yeah. Sometimes the first thing that they need is just our presence. Just, how can I help? And then he says, tell me, what do you have in your house? Which is another piece of just saying, when we're in need, oftentimes it magnifies our lack. And he just says, let's just start with what you have in your house. And she says, again, magnifying the lack, your servant has nothing here at all except for a small jar of olive oil. And so the story goes on that Elisha tells her, well, then go around to all of your neighbors and your friends, get all of their jars of olive oil, get all of their empty jars, bring them here, and just start filling them up. And the miracle is that as she pours out her jar of olive oil, one after another, it just continues to fill up until she's able to take those, she's able to go sell them, she's able to pay off her debts, her sons don't have to go into slavery because of it, and they live off the overflow. And to me, it just continues to show that when we, and I mentioned this in the message in the takeaways, that when we offer God what we have, we can trust Him to give us what we need. And so that's essentially what she does, is she just trusts that God is going to provide for her through this prophet. And for me, like a personal takeaway from this is that, I think it's the book of 2 Corinthians that says that we have these treasures in jars of clay, that we are vessels of the Lord on earth. But the key is just like what Elisha told her to go collect, is he didn't say go collect other jars and then empty them out. He said go collect their empty jars. Collect the things that they were going to discard. And so for us, we just have to make sure that we're empty, because the symbolism on our end is we are the jars of clay and the Holy Spirit is the oil. And so it's key for us is just to approach Him every day and say, Lord, I'm empty. Like, fill me up. Give me everything that you have for me today. And so it's one of the personal things I love about this story is that I think it's powerful. So that's my favorite miracle. And some of that's the reason why.
There's like a full message in those 7 verses.
Yeah, no, there really is. That's the hard part with all these miracles, is they're like all sermons. If you just Google Elisha, you get sermon series just about him. So it's tough to whittle it down. Yeah. It's good.
What was your favorite?
I like them all because I love the Bible. Just kidding.
Okay,
See,
that's why you're the nerd.
I got Jesus juked by Pastor Jason.
No, it really is kind of tough to pick. I mean, my favorite is probably another one back to the days of Sunday school. But it's the healing of Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize from the Sunday school story that he was a little bit of a snob. I mean, he was a big deal, and he'd already been through a lot and seen a lot. But he came back, and he had leprosy, and he was offended, first of all, that he wasn't greeted by Elisha, which Elisha did that on purpose, because I guess he wanted him to approach in humility. He also hated the idea of going and bathing in the Jordan, because it was dirty and muddy, and the rivers, and I guess Syria where he's from, the rivers were magnificent, and he's like, I don't want to get in that dirty water. And his servants were the ones that convinced him to listen to Elisha again. And I just think it's kind of funny that he didn't have to go and just bathe in it once. He had to go down in the water that he didn't like 7 times. Mm-hmm. But then he was healed. He was healed. And I think it's funny also that miracle was done not on somebody of the nation, but on a foreigner, showing that God's not only the God of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, he's the God of all. Mm-hmm. And it's a reminder that it doesn't matter throughout the book of 2 Kings, it doesn't matter which army won. It was only because God gave the grace for them to win. No matter the circumstance, God was still God, and anybody that recognized Him as such had a chance. And so I love that miracle, and I love that he did prove himself faithful. He went down and obeyed the word of the Lord, and he was healed.
Yeah. I like it because he was frustrated that Elisha wouldn't just I think it says wave his hand over him and he would be healed. And it's interesting that Elisha was gracious to the widow, and he didn't shame her. He didn't give her any attitude. He just says, what do you have? And he took care of her. But with Naaman and with the 3 kings in chapter 3, he was the opposite. He answered he gave them the miracle, but it was in a way different than what they thought. And it wasn't easy. It was not rainfall, but it was an irrigation plan. It was not, I'm going to wave my hand over you and you're cured of leprosy. It was go take, all these baths. And it was just interesting to me that he didn't have much patience for the guys that everybody thought he should have patience for. So I kind of like that about him. I like the edge.
Yeah.
I think this one's a simple one, and it's probably not one that's nearly as sermon worthy, but the one about the axe head I think is really interesting. In 2 Kings 6.
That's crazy.
So
that's crazy.
yeah,
Like
It's sermon worthy.
yeah, maybe it is. I was just gonna read part of it. It's in 2 Kings 6. Then they went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water. "Oh no, my lord," he cried out. "It was borrowed." The man of God asked, "Where did it fall?" When he showed him the place, Elisha cut a stick and threw it there and made the iron float. "Lift it out," he said, and the man reached out his hand and took it. I think the simplicity of it, I think, is really interesting to me because it's something that it shows how much God cares about the seemingly small things in our life. Because, I mean, you think about somebody has borrowed this axe from someone, and the Bible points that out. Like, it's obviously an important part of it, that it was a borrowed thing, that could have really caused a lot of problems. And also something as simple as, retrieving this axe head. It's like making iron float. I mean, that's not, it's pretty crazy.
When it shows you the project they were working on in particular was urgent and it was important because the numbers were growing. Yeah. They needed a place to house them. And I mean, is that much different from what we're doing in today? Like the building of God's house, the building of an accumulation of resources is a big deal, and it's an important mission.
Yeah.
So I like in that miracle, verse 5, 6, somewhere in that range, he asks the guy, he says, "Where did it fall?" And I kind of like that. And I heard somebody say this one time, that you got to be honest about where you lost it. You got to be honest about where in your life you lost your edge, where you lost your life. When, and I've talked to people, honestly, I've talked to a few people we're in this season of 10 days of praise right now, who have said, life's just not good. And life 6 months ago was like on fire for the Lord. It was just, everything was working. And one of the things I've challenged them in is just said, hey, the Bible talks about in Revelation, just go back to your first love. Like the things that you did then, do now. And when you look at it, like sometimes we lose our edge because we've gotten into that relationship we shouldn't get into. We've said yes to that thing we shouldn't say yes to. And so a lot of times it's just the miracle is just starting with, where'd you lose it?
Yeah.
And going back to there and then seeing God move through that. So anyway, just a total side note.
Oh, that's good.
That's really good.
Yep. Pastor Matt, you have a favorite
I'm all about the she-bears, as we've already talked about. I just love saying it. I want to see how many times I can say it today. No, but what I do love about Elijah and Elisha is this. You get to see a picture of Jesus in all these different prophets throughout the Old Testament, and I do love that. And one thing you see in 2 Kings 6, you actually see the Syrian armies. They're coming. They're getting ready to raid the territories of Israel. And then we see Elisha. They're blinded. They can't see. And that's a miracle of its own. All of a sudden, they were seeing. They couldn't see anymore. But then we see him give them back their sight. And I think that's just showing them grace. It actually says that the king asked, should we kill them? And Elisha said, no. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and go back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away and then returned to their master, so that the armies of Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. And to me, what that goes back to is we talk about miracles a lot. Usually we're talking about miracles in the body. We'll see what Jesus did with miracles. But here we get to see that it shaped their nation a little bit, where they were not raided anymore from them. And so it just, miracles go a lot deeper than just physical healings.
Yeah.
I don't think we talk about what it can do for a family lineage, for a line. What God's doing in your life right now could set the trajectory for your family line.
So
and
good.
I think we see that in this kind of miracle where people's lives were changed.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's really, really good.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. That's powerful. Sometimes miracles are seen as immediate and not the long term. Yeah. That's really good. I've got a friend who, for the last few years, he's been praying their house down to a zero balance.
That's awesome.
And his thing is like, for me, it's almost like I hear it and I'm like, oh, that'd be awesome. I wish I could write a $100,000 check. And he goes, I'll probably never be able to do that. But eventually the Lord can provide that miracle. And he talks about what you just said, what that will do to his family long term. Is it'll change the trajectory of his retirement, his kids' college, like all of these things will be different because he's trusting the Lord for a miracle that just seems it's probably not going to be immediate, right? But when it happens, it's going to change everything. So that's good.
I think that's a good imagery anyway. And you even mentioned how so many prophets like Elijah and Elisha, it's all like getting us prepared for like Jesus showing up on the scene. And it's just cool how all of that kind of blends through. And it's weird because you see Elijah is known as one of the greatest prophets in the Bible. He did 8 miracles. And when you look at how long he was there and how long his ministry was, that doesn't seem like a lot because we picture prophets just going around doing miracles all the time.
Yeah.
And he was only recorded 8. And it's just funny, like they're like little earmarks in history that have kind of rung out through the ages. Like they didn't go away; they're still there, and they're still speaking to the greatness of God. And then you see even the one from 2 Kings chapter 4 where Elisha multiplies the loaves. I mean, a lot of people that aren't familiar with the Old Testament, they may remember the New Testament story of Jesus multiplying the food. And even in those 2 miracles, you see that the story was Jesus is greater. Jesus is greater than the prophet Elijah. He's greater than the prophet Elisha because so many people were comparing him to those guys back in the day. But he's different. There's something different. And you see all these things, God preparing the way. And so it will ring out through the ages, all this stuff, like little dog ears in history.
It's really good.
Yeah. And now, a quick break for today's unofficial sponsor, Lifepoint Students. Lifepoint Students is a place for middle and high schoolers to belong and to find God together in community. Everything we do is to point students to life in Jesus and help them live life to the full. Lifepoint Students meets every Sunday from 6 to 8 at our Pine Valley location. We have games, worship, small groups, and on the last Sunday of the month, we host our large group event called United Night. It's the biggest party of the month. For more information, visit lifepointnow.com/students. That's lifepointnow.com/students. Now, let's get back to the episode. So I know we were going to spend some time talking about the different kings. But before we do that, I think it's important to give the people what they want and really talk about Jezebel.
You want me to sing again, don't you?
That is not it.
My bad. That's kind of
I'm still waiting for some
ego.
falsetto over here. You know what I'm saying?
Funny.
No, I think we kind of teed it up last week that something not great was coming for Jezebel. What not great is coming? I think we see it here in 2 Kings 9.
I think it's
Chapter 9.
It's kind of a fun story for me, and
it's one of the coolest
only because
and
of the way it
grossest.
starts. Let's see. So
Well, let's recap who she is too. She's not the greatest of ladies.
She's a bad mamma jamma.
he did it.
Pastor Matt's
been
been holding
waiting
on.
for that
He's been holding on
for
to
a
that
long
Season
word.
1, I've been waiting to say this, and I'm saying it.
And right before the podcast started, the bonus features, 2 bonus features, is Pastor Matt goes, is mamma jamma a bad word? We're like, no, that's a great word. Use
Making
it.
sure. That's the only reason they brought me on. So.
Say it again. Drop it again.
A mamma jamma.
I just appreciate that you're leaning forward and doing it very like.
Really gonna make sure this
You
is
really
clear.
own that. I like that. Isn't that a song too? She's a bad mamma jamma.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not just a mamma jamma. A
A
bad
mamma jamma.
Yeah.
Get it?
Yeah.
So that song is about Jezebel. Now it makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Well, the verse of what happens. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. I just wanted to give some backstory, and bad mamma jamma I think covers it. You know.
Yeah. So she came in. So like she was a foreign queen. She was not of the nation of Israel. She was brought in. She was a lot. I feel like she was conniving, like always planning. I feel like she was. We discussed last week. She was the one that didn't need to wear the pants in the family. But it's just funny because we see Jehu coming in, and just starting in chapter 9, the prophet Elisha summoned a man from the company of the prophets and said to him, "Tuck your cloak into your belt, take the flask of olive oil, and go to Ramoth of Gilead. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi." I feel like that's like a good.
Nimshi.
It's like
I like
That sounds
kind
like
of
a
like kimchi.
yeah.
like
I was gonna say
good
it sounds like a
sushi.
Korean dish. Kimchi. That's why.
Kind of hungry now, but I'll keep going. So the young prophet went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived, he found the army officers sitting together. "I have a message for you, commander," he said. "For which of us?" asked Jehu. "For you, commander." He read like a comic book. I love this. Jehu got up and went into the house. Then the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and declared, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. So they go on, and I love that he's commissioned with a mission, and he was ready. They refer to him as commander. Now he's gotten a field upgrade, and not just by anybody, but by the Lord. And so then we go on to verse 30. Then when Jehu went to Jezreel, when Jezebel heard about it, this is where it gets good. She put on eye makeup, arranged her hair, and looked out of the window.
I love the specificity there.
Yeah.
Oh, she was getting dressed up. She knew what was happening. She
got
was going to
ready.
make sure like he got her best. As Jehu entered the gate, she asked, "Have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master?" And it's kind of familiar too. Ahab,
Zimri.
remember Ahab would greet Elijah like kind of the same way, like taunting him.
Yeah.
She does the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to think that he learned that from her. But he looked up at the window and called out, "Who is on my side?" Who? Two or three. Let's see. Is that still? No. Who is on my side? Who? And 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. Pastor Kevin, do we need to go over what a eunuch is, or do we save that for cringe?
There's no reason why they wouldn't be angry.
Yeah, they have every reason.
They have every
No
right to be
shortage on
angry.
rage here.
So this verse 33 makes total sense. I think you need to read verse 33 with the anger of a eunuch.
I'll have to that'll take some doing.
Anger of a eunuch.
Throw her down, Jehu said. So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and the horses as they trampled her underfoot.
I think that was written by an angry eunuch.
Yeah.
Blood splattered on the
And
wall.
what was left out is like the eunuchs cheered and yes. applause.
A little higher than that.
And then this is where it goes on. Jehu went in and ate and drank. He didn't attend to it quickly. He ate and drank. He was tired. It was a long journey. "Take care of that cursed woman," he said, "and bury her, for she was the king's daughter." But when they went out to bury her, they found nothing except her skull, her feet, and her hands. They went back and told Jehu, who said, "This is the word of the Lord that he spoke through the servant Elijah the Tishbite." Tishbite from Tishba. "On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like dung on the ground in the plot at Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, 'This is Jezebel.'"
That's pretty dope.
Boom.
Yeah, so good, so intense.
That is intense.
And we see the end of Jezebel and her reign as the queen mother.
I appreciate that he still was like, take care of her. You know, she was a king's daughter. It's like, we should treat her well. It's like, wait, you really? You just threw her out of a
Her
window.
blood was just splattered
Well, he
on the
didn't.
wall.
Well, yeah,
Eunuchs took out their vengeance.
that's fair. You know, but yeah.
And that was the day eunuchs danced in the streets of Jezreel.
Yeah. But that's a cool story right there. That's not one that
great.
you usually learn in a
That's good
kids
closure
ministry.
too. That's almost as good as
that
like
not a Sunday school
binging
story?
the Bible.
Yeah, the she bears and the dogs eating
We didn't have those
Jezebel.
felt characters in my Sunday school class.
what is it called? A flannel graph?
Flannel graph. We didn't have that.
I didn't have any of those.
Yeah, that is I mean, he said it was like dung on the ground. That would have been a great.
That would have
spot
been an
for a
awesome
poop
felt
emoji
character. Yeah, poop emoji felt character.
It's just
like
her head, her hands, and her feet. Man, that's an image. All right, so we were going to talk about some of the kings. Pastor Kevin, I know you said that there was one in particular that you didn't get a chance to go into in the.
Yeah, one of them that I wasn't able to spend any time talking about was Hezekiah. I like Hezekiah. And the thing with the kings, so to me there's a couple of things. One, this is where 2 Kings can get not confusing, but a little chaotic because you're bouncing between the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. You're bouncing between their kings as well. What 2 Kings doesn't tell, and kind of a tease for like season 3, even probably season 4 of Bench the Bible, is that the prophets that we've talked about, most all of these kings had prophets. And because there were constantly ones there, the rest of the Old Testament is kind of lined out with the end of the Old Testament kind of has those. Isaiah, Jeremiah, you get into Micah and all those prophets as well. They spoke things to these kings. And so we're now moving forward, the seasons that are upcoming that cover the rest of the Old Testament will be a lot of crossing paths of some of these kings, some of the prophets, the timing, the cities, all of that kind of stuff starts to overlap a little bit. But Hezekiah I like because with Hezekiah, I mentioned yesterday that for the the southern kingdom of Judah, that there were some times where they had essentially threats. Like they had about 100 years after the northern kingdom fell that they had just threat after threat. And God would show up and he would rescue them and he would do all the things that he had done and all the things that he promised to do. And so one of those took place with Hezekiah. And so Hezekiah is a king of Judah. He steps in. He has the Assyrians come against him. The Assyrian king, I cannot pronounce his name. I will not say that's why I cut him from the message yesterday, but it definitely doesn't help.
Oh, we don't have the pocket pronunciation guide here because Pastor Jeff's not here, so we can't even check.
Yeah, so I do not know. Sennacherib? Sennacherib, is that it? All right, so we're going to go with that. So, but anyway, so he comes against, and the Assyrian army at the time, this is what's interesting to me about the story. Assyrian army, they're a world superpower at the time. So they come against the nation of Judah. They want Judah. And Hezekiah is the king. He's been the king for a while, so it's not like he's new to this. I think he was in the 14th year, something like that, of king. And he's already faced down one of the Assyrian kings. His name was Shalmaneser, I think is the way you pronounce that one.
That's nice. I like that.
And yeah, so this is his second Assyrian king that he's facing. This one comes to him, threatens Jerusalem. They have some back and forth. There's even a point where I think it was with the previous king that Hezekiah didn't pay him off, but he basically paid for like, hey, I'm buying some safety here. And so, but Hezekiah was also a king who did trust the Lord. Like when you look at verse 5, I think, of chapter 18, it describes a little bit about him. It says, Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah. To me, that's important to like just highlight, because Judah, the northern and southern kingdom, had just a litany of not so great kings. So when we see that said about one of them, I think that's important. Mm-hmm. And neither none before nor none after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following. He kept the commands of the Lord that God had given Moses, and the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him, which is really crucial, which is why the Assyrians were constantly coming at him, because they wanted to remind them, hey, you can't do that. Yep. And then they also wanted to just assert their dominance. So fast forward, the king essentially of Assyria sends this threatening letter. And he says, listen, if you don't do what we say to do, then we're going to come at you. We're going to take you down. And in verse, let's see, I think if we fast forward to the next chapter, chapter 19, it outlines what Hezekiah does with this letter. And essentially, the Bible says he laid the letter before the Lord. The messengers came in, they read it to him. He takes it to the temple, he lays it before the Lord. And in verse 15, this is the prayer that he prayed. He said, Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. Which to me is just, it's a great reminder in prayer. You know, we prayed a lot of prayers over these past several days. It's good sometimes just to remind ourselves that God, the Assyrians are nothing for you. Like cancer is nothing for you. Mm-hmm. You're the God over all the kingdoms of the earth. That's good, yeah. You've made heaven, you've made earth. So give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to the words of the king, the Assyrian king, has sent to ridicule the living God. And I think it's a reminder, too, that when we are attacked, when God's children are attacked, that God takes that. When my kids are attacked, your boy takes that personal, right? Mm-hmm. And what Hezekiah's prayer does is it reminds us of the same thing. And then he just essentially says, it's true, Lord, the Assyrian kings have laid waste to all these other nations in their lands. They've thrown their gods into the fire and they've destroyed them. For they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand. So, and I love this, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God. And then when you look at what happens next is Isaiah, who we'll learn about in the book of Isaiah, who was Hezekiah's prophet, comes along and he essentially prophesies over the fall of the Assyrian king. And then that night, if you drop all the way down to verse 35, here's what's so cool to me, is in verse 35 it says, that night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 troops in the Assyrian camp, which is crazy. And so literally, like, everybody wakes up the next day, imagine 185,000 people who are all gathered around your city walls are all dead. Like it's not, it's a little weird, but it's a victory. But here's what's interesting to me about it, like in history, is we talked yesterday about Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. Mm-hmm. So before Babylon was a superpower, Assyria was a superpower. When the angel of the Lord wiped out 185,000 troops, that's the thing that happened that allowed Babylon to rise to power, because then they could go to Assyria, who had no army left, and take over. So when you start, there's a lot of things that are behind the pages and stories of the Bible that are just interesting, especially when you know what you know about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. You just start to learn, okay, this is how everything sort of pieced and fit together. So I like Hezekiah's story because, one, there was no king before him or after him who was as dedicated and devoted to the Lord. But I love that miracle because that miracle, you mentioned it earlier, it's a miracle that reshaped history.
Yeah.
It's not just about
he was the God
the
of all
nation
nations.
of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
I know Hezekiah is awesome because if you notice, he constantly goes to the Lord. He either goes to the Lord or he goes to the prophet. Even in chapter 20, when he gets sick, and the prophet comes and says, "You're not going to recover," but Hezekiah says, that's fine, but I'm still going to go to the Lord. And he goes to the Lord, and then the Lord honors him, and he gives him 15 more years of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's awesome. His heart and his faithfulness are pretty inspiring.
Yeah, and I think when he died, I would have to go back. I don't have my physical Bible that I read at home right in front of me. There's some things that I've written down about that just talk about him and everything that he added to the kingdom. Like he brought so much more than just what normal kings would bring. Like he enhanced the kingdom.
Well, and he was one of the last kings of Judah, right, to break down the high places, the Asherah poles, the temples, and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. Any other kings that we want to talk about?
I mean, the one that I kind of talked about or read about a little bit earlier today was even this, just King Manasseh he was an evil guy. And so he became king at age 12, and then he reigned for 55 years, which is the longest in Judah's history. And he did a lot of things. He brought people back to Baal worship, so you see more human sacrifices, all these kind of things. Just an evil, evil man. But what I'm reminded of is regardless if you have David, who was a great king, or if you have one of the worst like Manasseh, they're still not God. It doesn't matter how great or how evil they were. They're never going to be God. And I think that, God gave the people what they wanted. They wanted a king. But he still made sure no one was ever going to reach the perfection of who he was. And I think that's just powerful to see is, it got bad, and we had great times. Israel had great times, it had bad times. Judah had great times and bad times. But no one's ever going to be God. And I just think that's so true in all these, because we have a lot of evil kings that we see in 2 Kings, just horrible, horrible men, but they never sunk the ship too far for God's people. Yeah. And that's what I love to see. And so whoever's listening, for you, you're never too far gone, and God's always going to be God. And I just think that's important.
Yeah, good. That is good. Especially when you look at the state of the nation when Manasseh took rule, because Hezekiah had cleared the land. Right. Yeah. And for Manasseh to be considered the king that was that evil, the Bible says that he's the reason for the fall of Judah. Like I really had all those evil kings, you place all the blame on him. Well, to see him bring so much evil back so soon when Hezekiah had basically rid the land of it. Yeah. So he really did do a lot of bad things, shed a lot of innocent blood, and the things that other heathen nations had experienced judgment for, he led into Judah.
Yeah, I read somewhere, this was years ago, but it was someone did a study about the kings of Judah and Israel and whatnot, and they talked about their approval rating, and they essentially said to be a holy king was to have a low approval rating. To be a Manasseh king was to have a high approval rating, because most of the nation would look at other nations and go, hey, we want what they have. Like, it makes sense to have what they have. It doesn't make sense to have what we have. And so someone like Manasseh was probably infinitely more popular at times. And so, but it's just interesting to kind of read it that way, that Hezekiah, not so much. But it would take the Lord moving on their behalf for their approval rating to go up.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, and he did lead in to my favorite king. So some of you don't know this, some of you do. I was in a ska band back in the day when I was in college. Remember ska? Everybody likes ska?
No, I do
Stacey
not remember
Baysden.
ska.
If Stacey Baysden is listening, we need photographic evidence.
Oh, no, we don't need that.
We need photographic evidence of Pastor Jason in a ska band.
Now, they were crazy talented, but whenever you're in a band, whenever you get, and the privilege of this band was I got to be one of the founding members. But what does every band need? A name. Doesn't matter who plays what or songs, you got to have a cool name. And we wanted to be like completely Christian and fun-loving. And so we started reading through, like, how can we have,
bleak.
like, the coolest name? And so one of the names that we kind of discovered, because I just mentioned to one of the guys, he actually a super cool guy, Dave Leeds. If you're listening, dude, I love you and I miss you. He was a super talented musical guy, like played a killer saxophone, because in a ska band you got to have a saxophone.
I was going to say,
if you don't have a trombone, trumpet, and a sax, you're not really a
Christian
ska
ska band. You have to have a shofar.
I don't-
So
I don't know what any of these words are.
You don't know what a saxophone
shofar
is?
I know what a saxophone is, but I don't know. What is that?
Shofar?
Shofar.
Is that the bad guy in Aladdin?
wait, is that
Jafar.
Was that Jafar or Shofar?
That's Jafar.
the bad guy?
That I know, obviously.
Jofar.
Yeah. Anyway, please continue.
So anyway, I mentioned that one of my favorite kings was Josiah. And we looked in the Bible, and the title in the Bible was Josiah's Reform. We were like, that's it. That's
your
our name.
Josiah.
And it got voted down because it sounded more like a folk band than a ska band. So,
Welcome
but
to
anyway,
the stage. Josiah's Reform.
doesn't it sounds like
Featuring
somebody
Jason
you're at a
Baysden
coffee
on
shop with
shofar.
acoustics. Well, we could bring that back.
wish
Wait,
we had a shofar.
what was your name? You can't leave us hanging.
Oh, so we did come with the name Kamikaze Friday. Because
Wow, those are complete
because
opposites.
it was great ska imagery, but because kamikaze means divine wind, Jesus sacrificed himself on a Friday. Yeah, Kamikaze Friday, like Japanese pilots that fly in, they were called kamikazes. But the Japanese translation was divine wind. And so I was like, Jesus died on a Friday. It was divine Kamikaze
dumber.
Friday.
My
Jesus
mind
is
is
the first
completely-
kamikaze.
A better name
Completely theological.
would have been Bad Mama Jamma. Just throwing that out there.
She's a bad man.
This one's dedicated to Jezebel.
Wow.
So Josiah, I mean, even though we didn't use the name, he's still my favorite king. And really because he comes in like on the heels of, you see Manasseh ruling for so long, and then Amon, and he had a short reign. You see Josiah come in chapter 22. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. His mother's name was Jedediah, daughter of Adiah, whatever. She was from Bozkath. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed completely the ways of his father David. But the way he did that was amazing, because if you go down, when he was king, he had heard words of the book of the law, but he was like, where is this book? So he sent, I mean, I see it as kind of like a task force. He sent priest in, Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, Akbar, son of Micaiah, Staphan the secretary, and Asaiah the king's attendant. Go and inquire of the Lord for me, for people in all Judah, about what was written in this book. So they found the book in the temple, and he was like, we need to know all about it. So they actually went to, what was her name? She was a prophet, Huldah, which was cool that we see a lady with the title prophet. It was awesome. Who was the wife of Shallum, son of Tikva. I don't really know who he is. But we see that she lived in Jerusalem, and she said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says. I'm going to bring disaster on this place and its people according to everything written in the book of the king of Judah has read. So because of Manasseh and everything he had set in place, the land couldn't be forgiven. You know, there had to be punishment, had to be judgment. Because they have forsaken me and burned incense to other gods and aroused my anger by all the idols their hands have made, my anger will burn against this place and will not be quenched. Tell the king of Judah who sent you to inquire to the Lord, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says concerning the words you have heard. Because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before the Lord when you heard what I've spoken against this place and its people, that they would become a curse and be laid waste, and because you tore your robes and wept in my presence, I also have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore I will gather to your ancestors, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I am going to bring on this place. So they took her answer back to the king. And so then we see from there, Judah, or Josiah, goes basically on a rampage. He destroys everything that was set up to be against the Lord, and he reinstates priests. He gives them safe havens. He gives them another safe place to go, establishes doorkeepers of the temple, and brings everything back according to the book of the law. And he reestablishes God's kingdom. And because of that, God honors them, and they get to die and see in peace. Super cool.
Strong.
Josiah's reform.
If you ever
Also,
start another
great
ska
ska
band,
band
you can name it that.
Which I do think you should start another ska band.
Yeah.
I hear the 90s are coming back.
Let's
I
go.
don't even know what ska is.
So it's like basically punk rock with saxophone, trumpet, trombone.
I
awesome.
can't.
Think of the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones or Big Bad Voodoo Daddies.
Who I don't
Not
know.
quite
We don't know
Scott,
any of
but
these people.
Yeah.
So that's your homework for tonight.
Yeah, apparently
Caroline.
I thought I was pretty well versed in musical
the Supertones were one of the best Christian ska bands ever.
But it's not screamo.
No, it's not
Oh, I
Screamo.
hate
It's
that.
literally what he was describing. You just take this type of band and you add in like horns, right?
I love
Kind
a
of a
good.
California thing. Did it come out of
Oh yeah,
the
it
West
came
Coast?
straight out of
Yeah,
Orange
I thought
County.
So yeah,
I like it.
All right. Well, anyway.
the '90s were a fun time.
Yeah, sounds like it. I was born then.
Thanks
Actually,
for bringing
that's
it
not
back.
true. Okay, so 2 Kings. I feel like we've covered a good amount of, all the different things that are in there. Is there anything else before we go to our next section that we wanted to touch on, Pastor Jason?
No,
Pastor Kevin?
I did think PK did a great job of like solidifying Zedekiah as the last king of Judah yesterday. That was awesome.
To me, that the most sobering part of 2 Kings is it's the end.
Yeah.
Like until this day, there's not been another king that's ruled in that nation, and it's kind of one of those. It was tough for. I mean, just kind of take you in my brain. Like it was tough for me to land the plane. Honestly, talking about this because it doesn't end up. And you really have to get to the end of it and just say, hey, we don't know when the last chance is going to be. And God does, like, he's patient and patient and patient and patient, but he does love us enough to allow us to feel the full weight of the consequences of our sin. Like, otherwise, why grace? Right?
That's
like,
good, yeah.
And so, so I feel like just the ending of the book is pretty powerful to me.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a section called Inquiring Minds. We haven't done this in a little while, but we have a question that came in this week that I thought we could spend some time on. The question is just, can you dissect 2 Kings 3:26 through 27? So I was going to read that and then kind of free for all chat about it. But those 2 verses are, when the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great. They withdrew and returned to their own land. So the question just is really to unpack why and what was going on here. So take it away.
I love that you're looking at me right now.
Well, I'm not looking at me.
So my first answer, I get first round.
You get first round.
That's all you.
Okay, well, so the mistake, obviously, that would be made here is to think that sacrifice caused God's army to retreat and caused God to like run and cower in fear, and that their God was greater, because that's their God, Chemosh, is actually who they're sacrificing to. And so that would be the mistake, because we actually, through all of our discussion just these last few minutes, we see that God is the God of all nations, not just the nation of Israel. No army, like before this time or after this time, can advance and do anything without his okay. I mean, he's still God. I mean, imagery and everything says everything about that. So why did they run in fear is the question. Was it, I mean, were they afraid of the human sacrifice? Or did they not want to, were they not trying to like spite the people? And because this really does refer to the fury against Israel was great, and fury was great because of this. So there wasn't like a lot of spite before this. It was basically 2 armies battling, and so like really, what was the cause? I kind of read up on this and kind of like looked at a few different things, and it's kind of split. I mean, the overwhelming answer is that their goal wasn't to spite the people. Their goal wasn't to incite them to the point where they would start to offer human sacrifices, because that was abhorrent in the eyes of the Lord. And so that's kind of where I see the most of the dust clear, is that for them to see a nation go to the point of offering human sacrifices was one of the things that kind of pushed them to retreat. They had kind of accomplished what they wanted to do, and they fled. They didn't flee in fear. They weren't chased down and conquered. So it's still a lot of questions, like what was the particular instance that caused them to flee. But I mean, I would tend to believe it was because of the idea of the human sacrifice, and it just taking them to a place that they didn't really want to go or be a part of. I don't know if you guys had any other thoughts, but
No, I'm with you on that. I don't. I'm looking over it right now. I'm just trying to, because until we just read this, I didn't I didn't see that question, so I didn't have any study time. Pastor Jason, sorry to leave you hanging there.
That's all good.
But I'm looking at it the same way.
I don't think there's just not, it's one of those questions, there's not like 100% reason. Cultures were so different then, and this was something that, this is actually one of the things, with what we were talking about Manasseh, like one of the things that he brought back were things from heathen kingdoms, like taking so much innocent blood. In this particular case, they would have been part of shedding innocent blood, even though they're not the ones that raised the weapon to the sacrifice. They would have pushed their enemy to sacrifice innocent blood.
No, that's good. That's tough. That's tough. No, I'm just processing that. It's a tough thing. I mean, I know when there's that much brokenness, when you're mixing religions, you're mixing worldviews, you're mixing all these different things. When the nation of Israel or Judah would go outside of their covenant with God and find a lifestyle that they wanted as a part of their culture, you got to understand there's like multiple cultures that are this like melting pot at that point. And so us making sense of that sometimes is difficult to do, because you're talking, when that happened to me, when they would go outside their culture, they abandoned the law of God, two things always happened. To me, sensuality reigned and justice waned. Like every time. And so you can't, and I even think that today, like for us, when we say, well, hey, I want God's presence in my life, I want to live according to his law, but also I kind of want this too. You can't expect everything to be like black and white, cut and dry. Does that make sense? Yeah. And to me, when justice waned, the two groups of people, when you look at the Bible, who paid the price were women and children. Yeah. And so some of it, again, I don't want to make it cloudier than it already is. I think Pastor Jason did a good job of unpacking that. But I think sometimes we have to make sure we have the right lenses on when we're reading some of this. That it was a place where people did what was right in their own eyes. I mean, we read that back in the book of Judges, right? Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if I confused it more or added any.
Well, and I'm kind of inclined to think too, because I mean, you even mentioned it, how people would see that and they would be like, "Oh, I want that." And we even know that, you know, when the northern kingdom of Israel was established, they stopped worshiping Jerusalem because he didn't want people to see that, so they'd be attracted back to that. I think maybe it could be flipped. Maybe they see that and people think, "Oh, we should do that too."
Yeah. Seems to be working for them.
Yeah.
I mean, that really was, when you boil it down to it, that's really what was driving everything. When you go back to the nation of Israel has just come out of slavery in Egypt, and Moses is up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, and they all look at the leadership and go, "Hey, everybody else has an idol. Let's make one of those." Right? It's kind of the same thing. Like, that just happened, and it was a snowball effect for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It's good though. I mean, I like that we have, you know, questions that make us, you know, think a little bit. And I think too, that's sometimes good to have questions that we don't always have clear answers to. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, if we always knew what the answers were, that might not be quite as fun.
Faith for a reason.
Yeah. Exactly.
History's messy. And this is it's history. Yeah. It's real. I heard somebody say one time, when we get to heaven, this was, you know, take it for what it's worth. It was this illustration, but they said, when we get to heaven, the sound we hear may not be worship, but the sound we hear may be, oh, that's what that means. Yeah. Oh, that's what that was all about.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Well, Pastor Kevin, did you get a chance really yesterday in your message to go through the King collection? I know you've talked about that a couple of times. But,
yeah, I talked about it.
But I don't know if you.
So the King collection. This was just something interesting that I've came across years ago studying King Nebuchadnezzar. And for me, sometimes when you're reading these passages in the Bible, actually doing some Google searches on some of the Syrian Empire and like at this time when Judah fell, at the end of 2 Kings, there were two superpowers. One was Babylon, the other was Egypt. It's interesting to me that Assyria had risen and fallen, Babylon rose and fell, and Egypt has always been there. So I don't have anything other than just that's interesting to me. But Nebuchadnezzar was, you know, a lot of people called him the God King, like he was viewed as some as a god. And but he was a guy who, when he would conquer another nation, he would capture their king, and he would go in and capture their idol. So whatever their idol, if it was anything that was created that you worshipped as that god, he would go into their temple and take that. And so he really had two collections. He had a king collection, which was all of the kings he had conquered, and he had a god collection. And so he would bring those out at parties. And the king collection, he would bring them out. And what's interesting is when he went to the temple in Jerusalem to collect the Jehovah God idol, well, there's not one. So he didn't have anything. So his guys literally come walking out holding like dishes and silverware. They didn't have anything. And it comes back in, I think it's the book of Daniel where that comes back. I think that's right, where it's referenced that there was like china, that was found in and because there was just no idol. But yeah, so he had a collection of kings. He would parade them out. He would maul or maim those kings in a way that embarrassed not only the king but also their god. And it was essentially a prison for kings, but it was his king collection. We all collect different things. That was what he collected. So I've always liked that. I've always thought that was interesting.
That's an interesting thing. Back to the point of, if you don't think the Bible's interesting, you're probably not reading it.
Yeah.
There's plenty in here that's okay.
Yeah, but there were some pretty painful maulings too. Like the way he would maim.
Are there non-painful maulings?
Well, I feel like
in general,
I feel like there's some that aren't as bad as the others.
Well, that's definitely true.
Like I don't want to have my eyes poked out.
Yeah, you get to Zedekiah, and I mean, you think about the sequence of Zedekiah's punishment. Like all of his sons are murdered right in front of him, and it is the last thing that he sees. Yeah. And then his eyes are taken out, and then when he's marched out, his God is essentially humiliated too. So because it was supposedly the God who sees, he was the God who could go ahead of and so that's humiliated every time. To me, what's really bad are the kings who had fertility gods. Like those are the guys that paid the price the most. So anyway,
the guys that threw Jezebel out of the window.
yeah. But yeah, the king collection is just something to me that it's always been interesting because it historically, how just what that meant. So brutal. But also, I think it's a great picture of what sin does. Sin, and I talked about this yesterday, to me, when it comes to sin, what initially attracts us eventually attacks us, right?
Good,
and that attack is that we have oftentimes these mistakes, sins, things in our past that most of the time we can keep them hidden. But sometimes it feels like the enemy parades them in front of all the people that we never want to see them. And when Jesus comes on the scene, he breaks the power of curse and sin and the curse of sin in our past and all of the brokenness that comes along with it. We do, and Caroline, you've led this for a long time, Pastor Jason, you too, but we do something here called freedom. And freedom is really, in my mind, one of the reasons freedom exists is because all of us have a king collection. We all have a thing like this place in our life where we just store like all those mistakes and all those hurts and all those fears and all those failures. And even if they're not paraded for other people to see, they're paraded through our minds. And freedom is just this way that we can say, hey, let's bring into the light what the enemy wants to keep in the dark. Because when sin is brought into the light, it can't live.
Yeah.
And freedom helps us do that.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's my side note on freedom and king collection.
Man, I'm really impressed that
we're connecting all the dots here.
Yeah, you brought that back around. Man, that was a holy moment. That started with maimed people tied together.
Just let me start talking. Eventually we'll get somewhere.
Well, I mean, y'all, I think that we need to leave the people with a teaser for season 3.
It's going to be a bad mamma jamma.
Mamma jamma.
Well, I mean, for the most part, we've been moving in like linear order, like through the timeline of the books of the Bible. We kind of did them in order, but we've been going, synchronized. Yeah. Now, but there's one book that we haven't really talked about, and that could pop up in season 3.
Dun dun dun.
Do we want to give anything away?
Should I give it away?
I don't know. I've seen sort of the outline, kind of the working outline.
But it may or may not be in there. We don't know yet.
Yeah. So we could say this, moving forward, like season 3, we know that like as sequential as we've been able to go so far, like, Genesis, Exodus, like it starts to get a little bit muddier and not quite as like mapped out the same, just because we're trying to connect multiple things that usually connect back to these kings and their stories and the
Yeah.
timeline of Israel's history, or Israel's history once they were in captivity.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's going to be fun.
Yeah,
It is gonna be fun.
chronologic words are really hard sometimes. Chronological order can be hard in the Bible,
Yeah.
It can.
but we can make it work.
We can make it happen. Well, season 2, I think we can successfully say that we have binged 2 Kings.
That's a wrap.
And that is a wrap on season 2.
Bad Mama Jamma.
Mammoth.
That's going to do it for today's episode of Bonus Features. If you enjoyed this week's episode, like this video, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel or to the pod on any streaming services. If you have questions about today's content, email podcast@lifepointnow.com. Don't forget to follow us on socials at LifePointNow and have a great week.